Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of Three Guys in the Word. My name is Andrew Ulmer, and joining me, as always, fellow workers in the field for his kingdom, Eric Parker and Chris Miller. Guys, it is great to be amongst you once again to open up the book of Ecclesiastes as we continue in our study of that part of the wisdom literature and scripture towards the middle of the Old Testament, and we're hoping that those of you that have been watching so far, that what we're talking about should be very much applicable, and hopefully it's been beneficial so far. I know it has been for me, and I look forward to what we're going to be talking about today. But how are you doing this morning, Eric? We'll start with you for a change.
I'm doing pretty good, but I just saw a spider crawling on my wall, so and it's a big old spider, so y'all give me a minute. How about Chris goes first?
If he gets bit and starts climbing on the walls and stuff,
I'm gonna have to get a name
that
change.
might be
Peter
something.
Parker. Thing's nasty. Look at that.
I'm doing good. I'm looking forward to today. Looking forward to our time together, like always. Chapter 1 was really interesting, I thought. Going through and looking at it, I'm excited to look at the book as a whole, like with Romans. Going through and looking at that book as a whole, I think you get a whole lot more out of it. Tons of sermons out of it. Tons of Bible studies you can have with individuals too. These books are like a puzzle. You putting pieces together. You see why maybe Solomon says something later on if you've read earlier on what he had said. So it's good to be able to do this. I like the collective group of study, being able to do that because you guys point out things I don't necessarily think about. But looking forward to our time. Did you get the spider, Eric?
I got it. No, we're good. Let's just hope none of his friends come around. It's like right behind my screen. Like I couldn't just let it be there. No. Sorry, Charlotte. Yeah, no, we're doing good. Adam last night, after Bible study, he started talking about his stomach hurting. And so like as a parent, you're like, oh no, oh great, but actually, it never really amounted to anything. So we're just kind of keeping an eye on him. I noticed a lot of people were kind of coughing and since the season change, I guess, and it's kind of dry around here. Y'all know, like it's pretty dry. Like it started drizzling a little bit yesterday for the first time in weeks. And so, you start just getting a lot of dust and stuff, and people are starting to cough, and you're kind of like, you got a family of 5, and you're like, we're gonna have to block out 2 weeks for this. But we've been pretty good so far. So I hope everybody's doing well. We have a new baby at our congregation. Well, I mean, the baby was there, it's just not visible. I don't know, it was visible, but not really. So the baby's been born, so we're really happy about that. And it makes me want to expand our family seeing a little baby. I just I don't know, it just makes me think about Genesis 1. That's like one of the first things God tells his people is to multiply and fill the earth, and he blesses that. And yes, I was talking to somebody yesterday about that, that a mother and father can participate in the creation of a soul. Like that's such a beautiful thing. Anyways, that's like way off track, but Ecclesiastes, yes. Ecclesiastes is a fantastic book. So I think some good things with chapter 1, and looking forward to progressing and realizing that Ecclesiastes is not just all like thorns and agitations and cynicism. There's actually a lot of really positive things in Ecclesiastes. It's just the way that the methodology that he uses is probably something we're not used to. And he sort of starts with the bad news and gets to the good news.
Well, it's good to be able to open up our Bibles again today, once again together, and before we get into our regular discussion, just as a reminder of why we go about doing these programs and kind of center our thoughts as to in preparation for our discussion. We have principal verses that hopefully center our thoughts. This comes from, for these particular episodes on Ecclesiastes, it comes from actually the book of Romans, which we just got done discussing not long ago. Romans 10, verses 14 and 15. How then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? How shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? How shall they hear without a preacher? And how shall they preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the gospel of peace, who bring glad tidings of good things. Of course, Ecclesiastes opened it up. Solomon acknowledged himself as preacher. He's speaking to group in the assembly. One who speaks in the assembly is what Ecclesiastes means. That's where we get the Greek word ecclesia, which means assembly, which is another form where it also means church in the New Testament. And so you can see why there's a connection there. So we're going to be talking about here in chapter 2, but just as a brief, as we do, just kind of reflect upon a couple of things that, or a couple of thoughts that what we do before we get in diving into our next discussion. We just go around and just give a couple of thoughts of what really stood out from our last discussion, and what stuck out. I just like creating that word. I mean, stuck. I mean, somebody will have to tell me, you know what, you say that all the time, but it's not really a word. But stood out.
You just gotta say it enough. Like once you
Yeah.
say it enough, it'll become a word.
Yeah, well, maybe. However, the wisest man who lived at that time, who had ever lived up until then, he talks about he went through great pains of seeking to learn, to acquire knowledge, wisdom, and that was still not what's going to complete him. And that says something. It reminds me that there has to be in all things a good, proper balance. And we talked about, or briefly mentioned in our last video, there's nothing inherently wrong with seeking to gain more knowledge and wisdom on a particular subject, but is that just encompassing everything in my life, just like anything? And then he makes this point that the more you know, the more pain and sorrows it creates, and that's sort of so true. I don't want to be ignorant completely of something, but I don't want to be just totally consumed by something to where I just be devoid of everything else, because that's going to affect how I interact with people and how I have my relationship, of course, with God. So again, finding balance. From last week, just a couple of thoughts of what you saw or took away, Chris.
Just one thing I wanted to point out, you think of Solomon, like I said last week, you go and you read about Solomon. We're going through Messianic prophecies on Wednesday nights, reading some of the Psalms of David. when you read that Solomon was a real person and read the experiences that Solomon had, you kind of see why Solomon writes the way he does. Like I had mentioned the first week we went through this, I always thought of him as just being this grumpy old man who hates everything and everything's just terrible in his life, really cynical type of person. But it's not that. It's just, I mean, even with us, without God, with God, there is kind of a reason and a purpose for everything. But without God, there are many things in life that lack reason and purpose. How can you look at suffering without God? I mean, it's like, what is this for? This isn't for anything good. But like we talked about in Romans, when we went through Romans 5, talks about, tribulation can produce character, perseverance, hope. There's always positives out of it. And Solomon, like we talked about last week, Solomon, asked God for wisdom on how to guide the people. And God just didn't have Solomon where Solomon knows everything. He had to, make discernments, and he made wrong discernments a lot in his life. But Solomon is fascinating to me. You have everything at your exposure. Everything is there for you. You can do anything you want. You can take anything you want. You can try anything you want. You have access to anything and everything you would ever want. And then you get to the end of the book, and when he finds the meaning of life, what he finds out's the purpose and meaning was there the whole time. That's kind of how I'm reading this book. He knows what I think he knew what the purpose was. I think deep down he knew what it was. He was the son of David after all. He was, the son of a man who is titled as a man after God's own heart. Solomon knew what purpose was. And going through and reading the first chapter, reading ahead, reading as a whole, a lot of times I've always thought, well, Solomon was struggling to find what his purpose was. I think he always knew what it was. But it is a temptation to try all this extra stuff because maybe I'm missing something. And I think as Christians, we fall into that trap at times. We know what we're supposed to do. We know what gives us purpose. We know what gives us meaning, but we chase after other things. And Solomon found out God could only satisfy him. All these other things are blessings from God, but they can't take the place of God. So that's kind of, chapter 1, like Andrew pointed out with wisdom, the more it seems like the more you understand, kind of increases if you don't have God, increases your understanding of how terrible life is without God. So, looking at this perspective, I'm looking at it as the son of David, the son of a man who is after God's own heart. He probably heard stories about his dad with Goliath and running from Saul. So many different things that his dad was able to accomplish. And his dad had shortcomings too, but came back to God. And I think Solomon, at the end of the book, does something kind of similar. What'd you have, Eric?
Yeah, I think probably there's a lot of truth to what you're saying there, Chris, about he knew. I mean, how could you not? I mean, certainly David, towards the backside of his reign, there were a lot of issues. But a person after God's own heart would inculcate certain ideals into their children. And so I get the impression, just as a father, you tell your kids certain things and you instruct your kids a certain way. And they sort of rebel against that for a time, and then they come around, they say, well, you know what, maybe the old man was right. I mean, we've done that with our parents, probably, with some things. Our parents said, hey, this is the way it is. Other things, they're not going to make you feel that way. And then you're like, you don't know anything. And you go and do, you sort of go and do your thing, and then you come to realize, well, that life experience was pretty valuable. They knew what they were talking about. That's probably, along the lines of what Solomon did. It seems like, from the messaging of the book, is he sort of had an idea. I mean, obviously he knew to request wisdom was a great benefit, and he asked God for that. He's sort of there, but then, cares of this life and all that sort of thing come in, and he's like, well, let me supplement this with some other things. Let me use this to figure out all the ins and outs of things. And so that's what he does. He goes and he learns about, like we talked about last week, apes and, plants and all sorts of different things, proverbs, and collects proverbs from people, writes his own proverbs, collects songs and writes his own songs. He's got wisdom from all over the world, people drawing near to him, asking him all sorts of questions, and he has an opportunity to exercise that wisdom. Then he comes to find out, well, you know what? Life is about more than having an encyclopedic knowledge of things. Life is not that that's not of any value, but like Chris had said, like Andrew had said, without God in the picture, it's not valuable, because you're just gonna die. Those encyclopedias are gonna go in the dumpster at the end of the day. That knowledge is just gonna dissipate at the end of the day without God. So really, there's a perspective that gets added in when you trust God's purpose and God's way, and that's what Solomon's going to come to the conclusion of. But yeah, chapter 1 leaves off on a pretty low note. For much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. And I use that illustration from last week that if you don't learn from history, you're destined to repeat it. If you do learn from history, you're destined to watch those other people repeat it. So there's definitely a challenge to the intersection of knowledge and wisdom and faith. And if you don't have faith, then the knowledge and wisdom don't mean anything. But if you have faith, and knowledge and wisdom have their place. In fact, 2 Peter 1 talks about that faith gets supplemented with knowledge and gets supplemented with wisdom. So there's a benefit to those sorts of things, but faith has to be there first. And that trust in God and that obedient heart, that submissive heart to God is what sort of activates the potentiality, activates the value of all other facets of our lives.
Well, we're picking up in chapter 2, and I'm going to ask you, Chris, if you would read the first 8 verses.
Solomon says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure. But surely this also was vanity. I said of laughter, madness, and of mirth, what does it accomplish? I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their life. I made my works great. I built myself houses and planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. I acquired male and female servants, and had servants born in my house. Yes, I had great possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered for myself silver and gold, and the special treasures of kings and of the provisions. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kind. I think I kind of can figure out what Solomon's problem is. He mentions I a lot. I said in my heart, I will test you. I said of laughter. Then I did this, and I did this, and I did that, and I did this, and I did that. I just think for us as humans, a lot of it comes back to that type of accomplishment. Like Eric, we were talking about before we started, with doing Legos, there's that sense of accomplishment. It makes you feel good that you've accomplished this. You can look at this work that you've done and say, hey, I did this. But that doesn't satisfy you for your whole life. And Solomon, to me, what's fascinating about these 8 verses is how many different areas of life does Solomon try to find meaning in? He's got orchards, he's got vineyards, he's got gardens, he's got fruit trees, he's got male and female servants, he's got singers, he's got silver and gold, he's got special treasures. If the things of life could satisfy somebody, it would have satisfied Solomon because he had all of it. Now, all those things are blessings from God. All those things in and of themselves are not bad. But what I will say is this: he was trying to put those things or people or possessions in the place where God belonged. God gave him those things, but he's like, I did this and I did this and I did that and I did this. It's interesting that he doesn't mention in here at all, these first 8 verses, there's not really any mention of God. I mean, and he has sections like this throughout Ecclesiastes where there is no mention of God. And I think one of the main reasons of that is because when he continues on and says these things are vanity, these things are worthless, it's to make that point. God is in this. God is a part of this. But what I will say is, for Solomon, he has removed God from where God needed to be. And he could have asked God for all these things when God came to him and said, what do you desire? He didn't ask for those. He asked for wisdom. So it's like, okay, what's happened from that, Solomon, to ask God for wisdom? What happened to that, Solomon? Well, I think he got caught up in it. Maybe he saw somebody else build themselves a house and see the joy and happiness that they felt from that. Maybe he felt empty and said, well, if I do that, maybe I'll feel good too. And I think we do the same thing. Somebody does something or buys something or, builds something or, finds a hobby that they enjoy, where like that thing makes them happy. I want to be happy. So I'm going to try to do what they're trying to do. And that's what it comes back to me when I read these first 8 verses. This is a man that if you put his assets on a piece of paper, he had a really, really good life, a really blessed life from a materialistic standpoint. But he's just like everybody else, just like the poorest person in Israel. Solomon's trying to find his meaning and purpose, and he's having a hard time doing that. And I think we live in the most prosperous country in the world. We do the same exact thing, trying to find our purpose in something. But our purpose is found in who created us and desiring that, relationship with him. What'd you have, Eric?
Yeah, it's a pleasure, right? It's hedonism is probably too strong because of the connotations that come along with that. But hedonism, just pursuing pleasure for the sake of pleasure. And you think about all the income that could be generated from these sorts of things. It's not even like he could have managers and things. It's not even like, you got a business, you got to put in hard work, that sort of thing. He's got all sorts of people to manage all that kind of thing. He can go out and walk in the vineyards and just pop some grapes into his mouth. He can, in fact, he could probably have some people behind him to pop the grapes into his mouth for him. He doesn't even have to take his hands up. You got the palm branches, the sitting in the lap of luxury. Everything is at his beck and whim. I hear this sort of a lot, especially I think with younger people, the older people too. But a lot of people just say like, if I could just have X, then I'd be good. If I could just have this, then I would be good. I'd be happy. Everything would work out. I wouldn't be as stressed. I could live a calmer life. I wouldn't be as agitated all the time. I'd be all right. No, no, that's not how it is. Even if you had that, you would still have a hole. C.S. Lewis especially has been noted for saying this, but I think it goes back to probably Blaise Pascal. He says something similar, is that God-shaped hole, God-shaped vacuum in each of our lives, and you can stuff as much as you want into that hole, but nothing will fill that hole but God. And that's really, the messaging here is, you had all these wonderful things. He's got the ponds, he's got the irrigation ponds, he's got the fruit trees and the groves, and he's got, plenty of time to do just anything you could possibly imagine. Different houses, like you could rotate your houses for the seasons. Like, I'm gonna stay in this area for this amount of time because I like the scenery, with the trees in this area. It's beautiful, red maple trees or whatever, like in the fall. This is gonna be a beautiful spot to be in, and maybe you want a couple little creeks nearby in the winter so you can see kind of the ice and the streams. And he's got all this planned out. And it's like literally everything is ticked off. All the boxes are checked. Everything is peachy keen. And just goes to say, it wasn't enough. It was never enough. The nice calm walks in the vineyards, the people popping the tasty delicacies into your mouth, and having everything in the world wasn't enough, because this world's destined for destruction. We know that. He doesn't mention that here, but we know that, and Solomon learned that. He learned that houses break and you got to repair them. He learned that groves have insect damage and there's droughts. He knows that these irrigation ponds can get clogged up, and there can be problems with that. There can be plagues and things. There can be some of your male and female servants or whatever can get hurt. They can do things wrong. He sees all this, that there's like chinks in the armor, there's cracks and fissures and going through all of this. And it's just, again, it's not enough. And by itself, it has no winsome power. Andrew?
At the beginning here, he talks about the party scene. We just think of here locally. There's one particular party that gets the whole area's attention part of the year, and that's like everyone would love and just desire to be part of that actual group for just that one night. And at the end of the day, something like that Solomon, who knows how many parties, but he definitely experimented with that and all that it had to offer. You can put that like in quotation, offer, because it's just going to be, at the end of the day, you feel lousy, empty to some extent, realizing, what did that all accomplish? It didn't fill me up. There was something that is lacking. He returns back to an empty house. There was once people in it, but it didn't last. And how well was there really solid, healthy relationships that benefited from it? I mean, just makes me think of a big house. You may live in it. A lot of people have big houses, but it's like you say something, there's that echo, and that's all you hear. It's just that echo. It's hollow. It's empty. And he talks about just having stuff, and stuff does not offer lasting fulfillment. Everything that he could potentially acquire, he got, and that was just something that ultimately wasn't going to fill him. He recognized this. And remember, speaking of people, a lot of people who most certainly desire things more than what they currently had. They most certainly would like to have had, being able to have luxury parties, the things that what is perceived nowadays is, hey, this is what's going to make me happy. Solomon's just putting it out there. It's not. There's just stuff that all the things that may entertain us or present to, hey, you need this, as we would say it, you need this better home, or you need this more stylish car, you need these more fashionable clothing. What's that going to do? It may give that just quick hit of instant gratification, but ultimately that's going to fade. And there's going to be something that, if it not already has come out, the next day it's going to come out and present, hey, this is what's going to make me happy or make you happy. And that's just one of the wiles and tricks and very much tools that the devil will use to entrap and burn into people that lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, the pride of life that John talks about in the New Testament. We just see it throughout, and you have it here that Solomon, he most certainly sought after the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. He went through and took all advantage of those things in his life. And that's just not going to, at the end of the day, under the sun, not going to matter at all. So hopefully we can all take a lesson from that, from Solomon and from God's word, that we need to make sure that those things under the sun don't entrap us, control us. We allow it, so we just got to make sure that we don't. Okay, Eric, if you would read verses 9 through 11.
So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward from all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor in which I had toiled. And indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun. So this is the second time here in just a short little while where he said, he's sort of better off than all who were in Jerusalem before him. And we need to keep in mind that Jerusalem was an established city for a long time, well before it actually became known as Jerusalem, during David's tenure, of course. It's the ancient city of Jebus. You've got Canaanite settlement there. It's a great defensible location, very ancient city. So what Solomon's saying is as ancient as our city is as far back as this city goes, even outside of Jewish control. I've got the best situation of anybody. I've sat higher than anybody, and I've had more luxuries at my access than anybody. I literally had everything given to me on a silver platter. And then for a moment, it's like, oh, he's not so cynical anymore. My heart rejoiced in all my labor. This was my reward from all my labor. In verse 10, you're like, oh, whoa, high point here. And then verse 11, he's like, yeah, but then I thought about it, and it was vanity too. So you come back to this idea. It's like it's a sort of a temporary satisfaction and temporary gratification, but it's kind of like drinking salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you get. And that's kind of the idea that Solomon's putting out there now. He also just, along the way, of course, verse 9, the end of verse 9, he said that his wisdom remained with him, which is kind of, an enigmatic statement, which we've come to expect with Solomon. But this idea that it's still there, as much as he's sort of experimenting with things and doing all sorts of things, sometimes you do that and you sort of lose ground. And he said, I've not lost any ground. I'm still pressing forward. You might you might challenge somebody who's bringing these ideas forward and saying, well, maybe you just didn't get enough. And Solomon's like, no, I did get enough. I had more than enough. And you might say, well, maybe you forgot certain things. Solomon's like, I didn't forget anything. And the person might challenge him again and say, well, maybe you just forgot, you forgot the benefits of something, or maybe that you're maybe just overlooking something. And Solomon's like, I'm not overlooking anything. I've seen it all. I've done it all. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt, like I got it. I've done it. And at the end of the day, of itself, it's not satisfactory. It's not satisfying. Not in a lasting way. It's there for a moment and it's gone. Moses in Hebrews chapter 11, it says that he sort of looked past the superficial pleasures that Egypt could have offered in order to join with his people and pursue the purpose of God. There in Hebrews 11, he uses a great example of faith. This sort of passing pleasures. That's Solomon saying, yeah, it was there for a minute and it was gone. It evaporated before I could really even settle into appreciating it. It was gone. Chris?
I counted when you were reading Eric. Over 30 times he mentions I or my in 11 verses. Not one mention of God. And I keep pointing that out, going through and reading that. My, me, I. Solomon's trying to find purpose in just himself. And that's how we do the same exact thing. Like, he's analyzing this. He's saying everything I could have done to find my purpose and meaning, it is not working. And I think that's a message that whether you've been in church your whole life, whether you get up and preach lessons or teach classes, or you lead people to Christ, or you don't have any type of religious affiliation or belief, that's something we all have in common. Everyone is trying to find their purpose. And I can speak from experience. When there's a lot of I, me, and my, I always feel like something is lacking. I think maybe that's because it's the way it's supposed to be. It was never meant to be about me. It never was. And I think, like I said, I think it goes back to Solomon looking around and maybe seeing that this was working for other people. He's got a void in his life maybe at this time. Well, I'll try this. And like Eric said, it's not like it was, Solomon's having to do all that. He had people that were probably in charge. He was like, hey, go out and do this for me. Everything you could want from an earthly perspective. How many people before Solomon and after Solomon have tried this same experiment in their life? Ecclesiastes is an experiment. And like Eric had said, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And those who do learn from history are able to watch others repeat it. And this is a story that's been repeated by probably billions of people, or over billions. Pretty much everybody that's lived since Solomon has in some type of way probably experimented or tinkered with this a little bit, outside of Jesus, obviously. Anyone who's reached the age of knowing right from wrong, we've all kind of tinkered with that. You get a new house. We bought our house like 2 years ago. And at that point in time, I was like, oh, this is a huge milestone. Now I come home and unlock the door and go in my house. I'm like, it's my house. It's where I live. When I have people over, it's like, yeah, it's my house. It's not like it's, oh, this is the thing that gives me meaning and purpose in life. Is it a blessing? Absolutely. And Solomon, I think, doesn't see things for what they are. These things weren't the thing to fulfill the purpose or to fulfill the meaning, but these things can point you to the purpose and meaning of life. Who gave him the orchards? Who gave him the vineyards, the gardens, the servants, the herds, the silver and the gold? Who gave him all those things? Who allowed him the opportunity to do that? Well, it's like when we have a blessing, God has given me the resources that I can have this. God is involved in everything. And I mean, I think reading some of the most content people and happy people in life are people that don't have much. He's the opposite. He has everything. He's not content. He can't find purpose and meaning. Sometimes I think when you don't have as much, you're more reliant on God. I think you can have plenty of resources and still be relying on God too. But in Solomon's case, this is where he falls short of his dad. And like Eric said, the back end of David's reign was an absolute mess. I would even equate it to a dumpster fire. It was terrible. But I think David truly never lost that heart that he had as a shepherd boy. He never lost that heart he had when he faced Goliath. He never lost that heart when he was running from Saul. He never lost that heart, even though he committed that sin with Bathsheba. And once he was confronted, he changed. He never lost that heart. And, not to hit Solomon, because I can see a lot of myself in Solomon, but at times Solomon didn't have that heart his dad had. David is a pretty prominent figure. So I think maybe in a sense, like Eric had said, you grow up and you think, well, my parents actually did know what they were talking about. I wonder if David tries to point Solomon in that direction. Solomon's like, whatever, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to go as far away from what you did as I can. I don't know. Maybe that was his line of thinking. But the main takeaway from this so far is it doesn't satisfy. Don't listen to the world. Don't listen to everybody else. The only thing that satisfies, that I know all of us can speak to as well, I lay my head down at night, and the only thing that gives me peace and comfort is knowing that I have God. The other things can't do that. I don't have that peace from everything else. I have that peace from God. Solomon's struggling. I think he's tormented in a lot of ways with this, trying to find that. But he comes to that conclusion, like we said, at the end of the book. Would you have, Andrew?
It's hard not to get, at least for me, to somewhat psychoanalyze Solomon, because it almost as if there's a lot of addictive personality traits that are being presented, especially through here. And as anyone that has had individuals, I'm sure we've known of individuals, loved ones that have suffered with addiction. It's like one drink, drug, whatever, is not going to be satisfied enough, and neither is 1,000. It's always going to have to have more and more and more. It's insatiable, and you get a lot of that, a sense here. And part of me wonders, I don't want to get sort of off on a rabbit trail, is, man, being the wisest man, everybody coming to you with all these questions, and just can imagine that your mind's getting ready to explode, just having all this stuff, that you almost get a tendency to, at least just think about it now, at least I wonder if just trying to, for instance, try the party scene just to take off some of the steam, just needing to withdraw from everything and just singing outlets, whatever I may find. This is such a burden, as he talks about these griefs that he's faced. And I just want some pleasure for myself. As in verse 8, he talks about, even to the extent of course, what a lot of people find, that, well, the ultimate pleasure is going to be sexual pleasure. And that's what he hints at in verse 8. As we well know, that's one of the most things that stick out about Solomon's life, about just acquiring every type of pleasure known to man. And of course, as we know, and he talks about it in verse 11, that these things are just empty, void of meaning. It's like grasping after wind, the profit nothing. And it's great that he comes to these conclusions ultimately. It's a gift, and people don't always can see that in the moment, that it is a gift. They come to the realization where you hit, as I see, rock bottom. He comes to this rationale that, you know what, man, this is not the way to live. Few come to that point, obviously, sadly, in this life, whether it be somebody that suffers from addiction. More often than not, they succumb to that. And if we're living of the world, we're really addicted to sin, and we don't allow God in. We put up those barriers, walls. It may not just be a physical substance, but thankfully, he just offers us some good words, wise words to reflect on. Like, where are we going to find our meaning in life? And it's definitely not going to be in things of this world. All right. Well, we could go through verses 12 through 17, but I'm kind of in a point of just cutting it off, if you're all okay with that.
I'm good with that. I did want to throw one more thing out there. If people are interested, First Kings like 6 through 8, you start maybe 9, you start seeing some of the building projects of Solomon, if people wanted more detail on that. A big part of this is you mentioned psychoanalyzing him. One of the major goals that David wanted to accomplish was to build a temple. And God said no, so that goal was sort of on Solomon's shoulders to do that. And so you think about Solomon, I think he starts building the temple like in the 4th year of his reign. And he reigns for several decades. So, he gets pretty much right on it. David had made a lot of arrangements, but, by the time he's taken over the kingdom, he's dealt with all sorts of things. It's taken him a few years to get that done. And pretty much right off the bat, though, he starts building on the temple. He's building these other houses and halls and judgment halls and all these other sorts of things. And you think about all that goes into this, and then they build a temple, and there's dedication for the temple, and there's thousands and thousands of sacrifices, and there's Solomon's writing songs, and he's sort of setting all the Levitical orders in place and everything else. And he does all of this, and then it's like, okay, what now? This was the huge project that was put on him. And David had made so many arrangements, and Solomon had made arrangements, and they knocked that out. And you got to imagine in Solomon's mind, he's like, okay, what now? What next? This was the big thing. And so they do this and they dedicate it. And he's like, okay, well, we're a few years into my reign. What next? And so he, just again, we probably have all been there. You do something and you pour yourself into something for so long, and then, it's done, and you're sort of, I don't know, your hands feel empty. And all that ambition that you poured into something, and all that effort and all that drive, and anticlimactic might be too strong of a word. I think it was climactic, but it was like, what do they call it? I don't know. I can't think of the term, but like sort of a decompression after that. It's just like all the wind just is gone now. And what do you do? So think about Solomon, and you think about that human tendency to, for some, to sort of drive and create and be ambitious and do this and work on these big projects and get this done and, get moving and these sorts of things. And I could definitely appreciate that to a degree. I've not built a temple for God, but I've worked on some big projects, and you get done and you're like, okay, what now? Like, there's even almost like an identity crisis. Like, who am I? I've poured myself so long into this. What am I supposed to do? And I don't know, maybe this sort of Ecclesiastes journey begins after like the completion of the temple. Now we don't know, but like if this is Solomon, then this could be part of that sort of process of working through what now. And he pours himself in all these different sorts of things. And he's like, it's not enough. It's not good. It's not there. And then his heart comes back to the temple by the end of it.
I'll just add one thing, just It almost is, again, this imagery. You can imagine Solomon stepping out like Nebuchadnezzar stepped out when he's viewing Babylon and how he created, and Jerusalem being essentially the place to go, because during that time, that was the pinnacle of Israel's history during Solomon's reign, where everybody flocked to Jerusalem to see how massive and really had that majestic feel to it. And you can imagine all the buildings and the wealth. And then that it was the place to visit. Everyone was kind of centered on that in that time in world history. And you can imagine Solomon just walking out, is viewing and imagining, like, look at all this stuff that has been built as a result of my doing or my hand in being in it. And yet you're just saying, like, man, I'm still so empty inside, lacking.
I was thinking, I think I found the term. It's an adrenal flush. So you think of your adrenaline pumping and pumping and pumping and pumping and pumping, and then like whatever the need is that created the adrenaline surge is gone, and you have a flush. I mean, your body just collapses under itself, and you can sort of deal with that sort of mentally too. That's what I was looking for, that sort of adrenal flush analogy.
Final words, Chris?
You know, y'all were talking, you think of Proverbs, a lot of the Proverbs are written by Solomon. Proverbs chapter 1 at verse 8 says, "My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother, for they will be a gracious ornament on your head and a chain around your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent." I almost wonder, and obviously the scriptures don't really say this, that it happened, but you know that relationship between a father and their child. A lot of times your father will talk about his mistakes in his life, the things that he did wrong. I can almost imagine Solomon and David, before David passes on, David having those conversations about leaving God and forsaking God, and the consequences that David had to face because of that, because of with Bathsheba, the end of 1 Samuel, where he kind of just, he's running from Saul. He's tired of running. He kind of turns his back on God, the things that happened to him at that point. And Solomon can sit there and listen to his dad, and his dad tells him that. And then Solomon goes and just does the same thing. And Solomon had to learn on his own. And you can imagine Solomon having those conversations then with his children. Don't make the mistakes I made. And, you know, in Ecclesiastes, like we talked about him being the preacher, to me, some of the best sermons are the ones that you've lived. Like, this is Solomon lived this. Solomon actually went through this, and he's talking from experience. And when I read that, it's almost like he's talking to me. Hey, you can try to do all this stuff you want to try to do, Chris, to make you find purpose and meaning, but it's not going to work. I was the king of Israel. I was the son of David. You know, you live in Louisville, Kentucky, man. You're not as significant as I am, and I still couldn't find meaning in it. So, you know, as we've gone through this, I've kind of coupled some Proverbs in there, been sprinkling some reading some Proverbs along with this, just to try to get that wisdom from Solomon. That you can kind of couple those two books together. He's given us a lot of good things to think about, and really kind of shown my dire need for God. I have to have God. If I don't have God, I really have nothing. So, really looking forward to next week. I enjoyed going through these verses today.
And that's ultimately what we're, I think, going to be hopefully presenting. With God, without God, we ultimately have nothing, and that's where we get our fulfillment. That's where we need to seek that relationship. That's what we want to make sure that we express in our discussions and how we live our lives, is pointing others to the Lord, because that's where we get our meaning in this life. If we're seeking to find meaning outside of that relationship with God, we're always going to be lacking. We're always going to feel empty at the end of the day. And that's where we get our hope. And we want to make sure that if you have yet to find that relationship, or if you're questioning it, if you just want to talk about these things further, we want to make sure that we want to encourage you to reach out to us, whether it be Chris. You can find him at the Shively Church of Christ Facebook page. I know that he would love to speak to you, or you can find Eric or myself through the Taylorsville Road Church of Christ Facebook page, or Taylorsville RD churchofchrist.com. We just want to make sure that each of us includes the three of us, and we want to make sure that all of us are heading on that narrow path that leads to the home of heaven. We want to be able to, when it comes to be our time, when we face to face with the Lord Jesus Christ, he's going to be the one that either says, come on in, or says, depart. And we want to make sure that he welcomes us forever into his home, where we'll reign with him for all eternity. And that's what is to be our goal in this life. So we thank you for tuning in. It was great to get a cameo appearance from Lady, who's been missing in action for a while. It's great to see Lady back, and it was great to be among fellow brothers as we looked further into the scripture. So we hope that you were encouraged today and had a lot of things that made you think and challenged you. And we hope that you will plan on tuning in next week, Lord willing, when we have another episode of Three Guys in the Word. But until then, may God bless you and take care.